We are starting a series, last week we did, to engage this new year, and I want to make sure that we're aware of some things going into this new year. And I share this from a bit of a troubled soul as a pastor, concern, and this has been a weight of concern for quite some time, and I'm just finding some release from the Lord to be able to put some of these thoughts into words and concepts. So I'm taking a little bit of unusual time to try and get this before us and praying and studying and trying to get it right. So I know I've received, and even last week the message generated a number of folks asking for meetings. So I've got a long list of folks right now that you are here asking for meetings. And I am trying to get to those meetings. So please be patient with me. I will return your emails. I will get back with you. I just don't know how quickly I'm going to be able to get back with you. If you're having an emergency, then please try and see one of the other pastors who would be more available. The start of my year is kind of hectic right now, but I will get with you if you can be patient and wait a little bit on that. Last week, we threw up a map last week to help us understand that entering a new year is a whole lot more than just a new set of time. It's not... We got a fresh set of 12 months. We've got 52 weeks. And we're going to pass through time. Well, entering a new year and what we remember about each year and what impact every year we've ever traveled through before is more like passing through a land, a territory. There's going to be encounters and experiences. There's going to be people in different settings, and those people are going to interact with us in different ways. And those people are going to be a different set of people for us. Some matter in certain ways, and some matter differently. And some events are going to make our life feel a certain way. And what's just extremely important for us to be aware of is it matters to us how life feels. Maybe more so than how life really is, because you and I live in our feelings. And so if life feels a certain way, that's what you're going to remember about the land that you passed through. And so, I made up some little territories here that may characterize places that you've lived in different years. Or maybe they're going to be the territory that you're going to live in this coming year. And you're going to be affected by living in that terrain. And not every terrain is the same. And if you close your eyes and just drift into another year, you may find yourself in a territory that's unfamiliar and that you're not ready to be there. And you don't know how to interact with God in that space. Some people have lived so many years, as Americans, as people who have so much luxury, we've got so much good, enjoyable things in our lives. We've gotten to where we don't know how to do difficult very well. And so it's not unfamiliar. And you'll see this in your own attitude maybe. Or at least in the attitudes of people you're walking with. When difficulty comes, we're disillusioned. We're disoriented. We're angry. Like somehow this was not supposed to happen. And can I just tell you, that's a very misinformed map. You and I should not be surprised this year when we travel into difficult terrain. The Bible has explained so much to us. And every one of these spaces that you can see in here, the Bible's all over them, speaking about them. Some of them warning us, some of them inviting us into these settings. But this year, I use the term kairos on that map, this opportune time of the year that's coming. It is not like any other year or any other season. Actually, I think we've been in this land for a few years. It's different. And I want to make sure you're hearing that, because there's something in all of us that says, and the Bible even says there's nothing new under the sun. Well, in some ways there isn't. In some ways, whatever is happening right now can feel very different. And it can interact with our thoughts and the way we do life in a way that we need to pay attention to. And so I want to bring us into a land. This week's message is called the Enchanted Land. You're going to pass through this land, but it's not just a series of events, and there's not just people in the land. There's enchantment in this land in a way that is different than what we have experienced earlier in our lives, and maybe even what previous generations before us have experienced. Here, let you listen to a bunch of thoughts here from some experts in these categories, and I do respect these guys in their views. Al Mohler, last year or a year and a half ago in a podcast, he says, in about 25 years' time, we've seen the most concentrated, high-velocity social change that human beings have ever experienced. Pastor, you're not wrong when you think that the whole world has changed. It has. When I heard him say that, it leapt out at me, because I do feel like, wow, this is not the same place that I started pastoring in. This does not feel like the world of 15 or 20 years ago. James Smith, in his recent book on these issues, says, it is the emergence of an exclusive humanism. I'm going to unpack some of these words for some of them today. This emergence, though, he says, a radically new option in the marketplace of beliefs, a vision of life in which anything beyond the imminent, I'm going to define that especially today, anything beyond right here and right now is eclipsed. For the first time in history, a purely self-sufficient humanism came to be a widely available option. Of no previous society was this true. If nothing else, man has always been a whole lot more, at least superstitious, than he is now. Even if he didn't have accurate belief in God, he believed in something beyond right here. Charles Taylor, who wrote a book a number of years ago, won, I think, the Templeton Award in 2007 and captured a bunch of people's attention. He says, there arises in the Western societies a generalized culture of expressive individualism in which people are encouraged to find their own way, discover their own fulfillment, do their own thing. The ethic of authenticity originates in the Romantic period, it's a while back, but it has utterly penetrated popular culture in recent decades, in the time since the Second World War, if not even closer to the present. See, everybody's noticing something's come on the scene now that's not like, and this guy's a historian. So when he grabs back all the way to the Romanticism, he's going back hundreds of years, but he's saying there's something in the last few decades that's emerged that's different. Greg Forster says the concept of the immanent frame, this word immanent we'll deal with today, a certain way of looking at the world of daily experience. It interprets all phenomena that we encounter in the world as explainable by mechanistic natural causes. Today, everyone sees the world through the immanent frame. Why did it take so long for the immanent frame to emerge? And why did civilization on earth resist it for so long? All right, so I know I'm dumping a bunch of stuff from outside of the wheelhouse of how we think. But I have to do that because you and I will enter this land dragging the ideas of the last few years with us and thinking that the world is just like it always has been. It is not. And if you're paying attention, you know your life doesn't feel the way it used to feel. Everything, and it's showing up most prominently in the pace of our lives and the volume of activity. And that's where you're going to attack the problem. But today I want to show us that the problem is deeper than that. There's a reason why the pace of our life is the way it is. And there's a reason why the volume of stuff is being crammed into our world. And that reason needs to get discovered. See, you and I are living in an enchanted land. It's enchanted. And there's stuff that's going to come into your life and you're not going to notice it's there. And you're not going to realize it's making you think different and feel different. It's invisible. It doesn't advertise itself. It has subtly come into our culture to where it's just the way everybody thinks. And so when you think like everybody else, you don't notice it. It's only when your thoughts are really odd, but we think like everybody else thinks. And this enchantment is having an effect on how you feel about your life, how you feel about relationships that are in your life. Do you find them satisfying? Do you find them empty? Do you find the people in your life boring? You need to move on to something else? How do you feel about your job, your work, what you do? Is that running out of space? It just doesn't hold your interest anymore. You're not affected the same way. See, there's all kinds of things in your life that are going to be touched by this enchantment. And where it's going to show up is this unexplainable sense that's going to suddenly be in your life that you're just discontent with so many things around you. And you don't understand why. And you feel so unsatisfied by so many things around you, and you don't understand why. All right, well, I'm warning you. You're living in a land that has an enchantment on it. That it will get underneath your skin, and it will get into your bloodstream, and you won't even know it's there. So what do we do as we approach this land? Well, I found it interesting. So turn to Deuteronomy chapter 6 with me. I asked you guys to read that last week and just meditate on it. Just 14 verses out of this chapter to spend some time hearing. And here's why this verse leaps out at me in this moment. All right, here's where we are when we get to Deuteronomy 6. If you'll remember, we spent a lot of time in the book of Exodus. Deuteronomy is 41 years removed from when the children of Israel came out of Egypt. So this is where it is time-wise. So God reaches into Egypt, rescues his people, brings them to Mount Sinai. They spend a year there. He reveals himself to them, he instructs them, and then they wander off into the wilderness and go into this doubt mode. And God says, you're going to wander in this wilderness for 40 years so I can let this unbelieving generation die off before you go into the land. So just as they're pulling up to the land, right? They pull up to the land from the east, and then they face west, and the river Jordan is ahead of them. And on the other side of that river is the land of Canaan, with all the Canaanites. And the people who live there and the cities that are there. And so they're parked on the plains of Moab, and Moses has this big meeting with them, and he reveals some things to them. And if anything, he's busted out a map of the land that's in front of them, and he's saying, this is where we're about to go, and this is what we're about to do, and this is what you need to know. All right, so this is Moses giving some map instructions to a people as he's about to lead them into this land. So I think it's very appropriate, very helpful for us. Verse 1, now, this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going over to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, that you and your son and your son's son, by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, and that your days may be long. Hear, therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Right? So here's the outcome that God wants, that Moses wants, and that all of us would want going into this land. Listen, when we get into that land and we set up new addresses and we start doing life over there, let's make sure that we fear God above all others, that we love God wholeheartedly, and that things go well with us. Right? So this is the outcome that we want on the other side of the Jordan when we get over there and we get settled. So these words, verse 6, that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise. You shall bind them as signs on your hand, and you shall be as frontlets before your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob to give to you, with great and good cities that you did not build, and houses full of all good things that you did not fill, and cisterns that you did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. And when you eat and are full, then take care lest you forget the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It is the Lord your God you shall fear. Him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the people who are around you. Now notice something, this buildup. We're standing on the plains of Moab. We're about to pick up our luggage and cross the Jordan, and we're going to settle in this place. And I don't think I would be inappropriate in saying the first and main concern that Moses expresses on behalf of God, that God has revealed to him, is that the land you're about to go into is an enchanted land. And the effect it's going to have on you, you could never imagine. You're going to find yourself forgetting God. Oh, no way. No, that could never happen. God is, as important as he is, God who rescued us out of the affliction and the bondage of the land of sin in Egypt. And he brought us to himself and he revealed himself to us and he's promised us a land full of good stuff. We will be thankful all the days of our lives. We will be worshipers of this God. We will love him and be grateful for him all the days of our lives. That's ridiculous. It is an interesting thing that the stuff and the setting, the way in which it's going to interact with you, God breaks some strange news to his people. It's going to produce a forgetting effect on you. You're going to get in all this stuff. Right? I mean, you got cities there. They got plumbing there, right? Cisterns that you didn't dig. You got olive trees and vineyards, and the houses are full of stuff. I mean, you guys are going to move into a land where the apartments are furnished. Everything's there just waiting for you. Just be really careful, because there's something about that and something about you that when you get around each other, you're going to be mesmerized by it. You're going to become enchanted. Right? And that's not the word this passage uses. But I like that word. I came across that word trying to wrestle with this stuff a while back. And I read an author who used that word enchanted. And the second I saw it, I thought, that's it. That's the word I've been looking for. The people in our day are enchanted. Right? Just connected to stuff in a way that even though all of us, I mean, we're equally enchanted and we're equally complaining. We're all too busy. We don't like it. There's all kinds of stuff going on that we complain about, that we don't like it, we don't like this, we don't like it. Yeah, I know, yeah, just... But we can't seem to stop. We just can't seem to stop adding one more thing to our schedule and one more person into our little liked world, or whatever it is that we're doing. We just keep putting more and more and more and more in it, and then we just complain more and more and more and more about it. You know, it's either enchantment or insanity, and those are kind of related. Why do you keep doing the stuff that you keep complaining about? I don't know. Because you're enchanted by it. You just can't seem to stop. Right? What does that word enchanted mean? Your outline there. Here's a definition for enchanted. It means to fill someone with great delight, to charm, to put someone or something under a spell. Yeah, that's what it feels like to live in this land. It feels like we are under a spell. It means to captivate, to entrance, to enthrall, beguiled, be spellbound, fascinated with, hypnotized, mesmerized. Right now, if you want a natural explanation for this, that the neurologists are figuring out that staring into this device is addictive. Has any of you guys read about any of that? You guys pay attention to that kind of stuff? Does that pop up on your screen at all? This is rewiring your brain, right? I've read 2 books on that just to make sure I'm not saying something stupid. It actually is rewiring your brain. And so it is taking portions of your brain and using it for this sort of interaction. Now, what your brain is doing, it is shutting down other portions of your brain that used to be used to think and operate differently. So over the course of time, part of you doesn't even want to go in that direction anymore because your brain gave up on that a while back. It only wants to do this. Some of us are going to have like thumbs that have this muscle on it that looks like this, because we could pin people to the ground with our thumb, right? Because we have worked it out so well. But we're mesmerized by it. We're just entranced. And no matter how much we complain, we can't stop, can we? Just keep doing it and doing it. Even when we recognize this probably isn't real healthy, we still can't stop, right? We used to call that addiction. Well, maybe some of us are addicted to some of these things. Well, here's the interesting thing. God says you're going to go into this land, and this land is going to have a weird effect on you. There's something about what's in there and something about what's in here that when those two get together and hang out a little bit with each other, it's enchanting. Now, what's interesting here is I'm not sure we're very concerned about that. God is concerned about that. This is first order of business. I'm bringing you into this land. First thing we need to talk about is the stuff in the land is mesmerizing. So much so that you will do the number one thing that you should never do. So if you'll do number one, you'll do anything, right? You're going to forget me in that land. Listen, if God is concerned about that, might you and I need to be concerned about it as well? See, we're not, though, are we? We're just thinking, hey, we're safe, we're good. Everybody's doing it, Keith. Come on, it can't be wrong. Everybody's doing it. Well, everybody's going to forget, too. This impact of the land is going to affect everybody. And that'll start making it feel normal. And they didn't even have Facebook back then. They didn't get to post what life looks like when you forget about God, so that everybody would know what it looks like to have God no longer as a priority, and they would feel as normal as everybody else, as that life, well, kind of looks like my life. So we go to church together. That's got to be normal, right? So it's reinforced enchantment in our day in a way that kind of wasn't for them. So let me just touch on 2 things really quickly here. I don't have time to really go into this. But how do you respond to that? How do you respond to the idea that you're going to dwell in a land that has these kinds of characteristics to it, and it's going to potentially have this kind of an effect on you? All right, 2 possibilities here. One reaction, and these are actually the way in which the recent Christian universe has responded to this reality. Right? So this is how the church has responded to this. One way, what's this one extreme, is by tabooing that land. Well, if that's what the land's going to do, don't go into it. Don't get around it. Don't do those things. I mean, hello, this is common sense. You just got warned that the worst possible thing awaits you in the land, forgetting God. Go somewhere else. Don't do that. And that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? until you read this confusing presentation in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And you find out they're going into the land because God is leading them into the land. They're going into the land and to experience things that God keeps sticking this weird label on. Good. He called some of these things good. Good cities that you didn't build. Houses full of good things. See, the church has had a history of recognizing this mesmerizing, enchanting effect upon our lives. How do you remedy that? Stay away from. And that's how the church has tried to do it. So you get this in the first 150, almost 200 years of the birth of Christianity. You start getting, if you guys are historians, you'll start hearing about people called the Desert Fathers. Early writings in the history of Christianity that grew out of a monastic approach to life because people started recognizing, you know what? When I get around this stuff, it enchants me. It mesmerizes me and it messes me up. So the remedy to that is stay away. Stay away. So they developed a pattern of how to stay away. They taught people how to stay away. Go live in a desert by yourself with the simplest of means. Do not allow yourself any comforts, any delights. Eat bland food. Dress in the simplest of clothing. Sleep on the hard ground. This was actually a means to holiness. A means to be protected from the enchantments of these things. And that finds itself all the way into today. Right? That can still be a way that some of us would approach this. You know, there have been holiness movements and Pentecostal movements that some of us are old enough, and some of you have been a part of these movements, to where, hey, you know, the way to not be enchanted is to not be fashionable. And so there's like a move of churches that just dress out of fashion. You know, it's like high on polyester that was in existence in the 50s, and somehow that became holy. And then as the world moved into new categories, it's kind of like taboo, don't you wear that. You bought what? You ain't wearing that. You ain't wearing that to church. Right? And there was this sense that if we just don't get around any of this stuff, we'll be okay. You know, the Amish people lived this attempt. Right? Stay away from technology. Don't drive cars. Who knows what that could do to you? You could get mesmerized. You could be enchanted. And so they're low tech. Out of a sense of some of this. Right? That's obviously not the remedy here. Because God is going to send them into the land. And He actually expects them and wants them to live in a place where there are creature benefits and there are things to delight and enjoy. God actually wants that for you. He created the world to have these kinds of things in it, and He created us to be able to experience them. So being tabooed isn't the answer. But neither is the other thing that's happened more recent than sort of those attempts at holiness, and that's the prosperity movement. And you live in a church world that's been drastically shaped by the prosperity movement. No matter where you are right now, no matter what Christianity you've been around, you have been exposed to a teaching, a body of ideas that does this. It looks at life right now, it picks the Bible up, and the Bible makes promises about all kinds of good things to have and things to enjoy. And prosperity says, well, bring it on. That's what God wants for us. That's the will of God for you. And anybody who's telling you otherwise, they're not reading their Bibles, they don't have faith, they're misinformed, they don't have revelation, and they critique the rest of the Christian world because it's selling something that falls short. But here is a critical flaw in prosperity teaching. Prosperity teaching ignores the chapter framing of the Bible. And it stares into promises. Many of the promises that it stares into are heavenly promises. Promises of health. Promises of wealth. Streets made of gold, right? I mean, all this promise that awaits us in the future. But it stands right here on the plains of Moab and says, hey, we believe in that right now. By His stripes you are healed. You heard these verses. And I could go on to a litany of them. But the great flaw in prosperity presentation today is that it is ignoring that you are not standing on the doorway of heaven. You're standing on the plains of Moab. And there's corruption in that land, and there's corruption in you. And when that corruption gets around this corruption, guess what you're going to have on your hands? Enchantment. Now, guess what? When you get to that land, if you and I were having this rally discussion on the doorway into heaven, it would not sound like Deuteronomy chapter 6. Because in that land of promise and enjoyment where there are pleasures forevermore, there's no corruption. That stuff will not interact with this stuff in a way that makes me forget God. If anything heaven is going to do for me, it's going to turn my attention all the more to God. And I'm going to gladly respond to it that way. And the more I partake of something that's got pleasure and enjoyment in it, the more it will thrust me toward God in worship and adoration and amazement. How many of you know that's not the land you live in today? So to stand as a prosperity teacher and throw one promise at you after another and say, have it, claim it, go into it. It is to take the kraken of cravings off of his leash in your life. Ignorantly. You and I are not standing at the doorway of heaven yet. You are standing on the plains of Moab. And when you go to enjoy, and when you go to engage prosperity, there is corruption in it, and there is corruption in you. For me to stand, I don't know if you could pull a Star Trek and beam back to the plains of Moab, one of these prosperity dudes, and they stood on the plains, and they highlighted what they're seeing in the land, right? There are cities, massive, incredible, economically developed cities. So when you go into the land, you claim being a contractor, brother. You go in and you start your contractor business. Get it going. There's luxury in the land. There's all this stuff. These places are filled with things, and there's luxury after luxury after luxury. So you go in there and you claim yourself a Lamborghini. And get yourself driving in style, baby. There's olive trees and there's vineyards. So you go in there and dream. You could be the next Food Network star. Get in there and pray. Ask God. That's how that would have sounded. But what God reveals to Moses is when you go into this land, you might want to be wise, right? In your outline there. Be wise and beware. You are entering an enchanted land. There are forces at work in the land, and there are forces that remain at work in you that can team up and go rogue. That can get you under a spell that you won't be conscious of. You try and live as a Christian, but you're under a spell. You're enchanted by things that don't seem to let God show up in your world very well, because in some way we've forgotten him under this enchantment. So there's a few things that I see in our culture today that are enchanting. And I had originally thought that we will just cover them today. I'm going to cover one of them today, and we may cover one more next week. Because I don't want to rush past these, because they're very hard to see. They're very hard to see them operate around us, and they're very hard to see how they may have taken root in us. So let me just take one of them on today. Being enchanted by the imminent. I'm going to explain what I mean to you by that word. That word imminent. Remember, enchantment means to be captivated or charmed by or delighted and mesmerized, transfixed upon. So we are transfixed, staring at, mesmerized by the imminent. This is what imminent means. Imminent means existing or operating within. inherent, remaining within. All right, now imminent has two dimensions to it that I'm just going to stick under the umbrella of right here and right now. That's what that word carries with it. For something to be imminent to any of us, it's got to be right here and right now. That's what makes it imminent. And right here is a geographical term that's specific and unique to each and every individual. Right, so you've got a right here in your life. Your world has a right here in it. And I don't know how big your right here is. Not everybody's the same. Some people's right here, which has to do with kind of their own level of interest, their engagement of life and people and activity and things and interests, they've got a circle about 1 foot outside of them. And some people got one about 10 feet outside of them. But however big your circle is, that's your right here. And right here and right now. Right now is a time thing. It's not a geography thing. It's a time thing. It has to do with the stuff that is going to touch my life the fastest. It's going to produce the quickest reward, the most benefit. It's going to be relevant as soon as possible. And that gets priority over everything else. Now, in the Bible, there are imminent things, right here, right now things, and there are another category, transcendent things. And our lives are supposed to have both in them, but they kind of go to war with each other in some ways, especially in our enchanted world. Right? That world of transcendence, that word means something that's beyond, above the range of normal or merely physical human experience. So there are these two dimensions in our lives. There are transcendent things that geographically they're over there. And they tend to be outside of my imminent circle. People, activities, the kingdom of God in many ways is over there. It's not right here. And there are transcendent things that are not right now. They're about the future. They're about eternity. They're not about temporary right now things. And these things are all throughout the Bible, aren't they? But here's what starts happening to us, and this is where I hope you can see. Has imminence seeped in under your own skin to where you're just not motivated by the things that are over there? You're not animated by those. You're not really weighed down, concerned, sacrificing, pursuing, making room for. Because that's just not how you do life these days. Today, you just spend a lot of attention paying attention to imminent things. Things that are right here. People that are right here. Right? We construct a world and people live in it. Right? So just think for a moment. You know, who's in your right here? Who are the people that you really exist and pursue and relate to and take into account and are affected by their existence? Who are those people? How many of them are there? Is it a different set than it was 15 years ago? Are there less people in that space than there were a number of years ago? And who do they have to be in that space? I found it's much more common for people to have just family and a couple of friends in this space. And not a lot else. Not a lot of others are occupying that space. And then you start thinking about the things that you enjoy. Pleasures. What kind of pleasures are imminent for you? What kind of things do you like to do? What are the things that you have interest in that you want to pursue and make a priority out of? And dreams that you have. Things that you long to have or long to be or long to do with your life. Do you ever notice that because we start living imminently, the people we interact with, they need to have those preferences too. They need to be a lot like us. They need to dream our dreams with us. They definitely can't be the wet blanket, throw the blanket on me kind of people who don't get around me and go, oh, me too. Ah, me too. Ah, you want that? Me too. And when you get around those people today, not previously, but today, you just stop getting around those people. You unsubscribe from them. You stop following them. Because I don't want your non-me stuff in my space, all right? I'm paying attention to what's imminent for me, things that are going to make me feel fulfilled. They're going to touch my dreams, going to make my world right here become something, and you don't seem to be interested in that. You don't seem to be about the things that I'm about, so I don't have any space for you. I mean, our devices are curious little things, aren't they? Because if you check your device, you'll kind of find out where the edges of your space are. Which apps you got, which ones you don't, what you subscribe to, who you always respond to. You'll discover your imminence a little bit as you do that. Here's an interesting thing about imminence. We're in a setting with people, generic set of people, and they're just not in my imminence. And so what do we do while we're with them? While we're with them, we bust out our device and ignore them because they're not imminent to us. Somebody in here is imminent to me, and you're just not. So I don't have any space for you right now. I don't really pay attention to you right now. But do you understand the impact this sort of thing has on something called the church? Because there's a whole bunch of people in this room who are transcendent people. They're outside of your imminent frame. And if we live like the enchanted world that we're a part of, we won't pay attention to them. We won't be available to them. We won't want to get around them. We won't take our precious, overcrammed, overscheduled time and make it available to children in the children's ministry. Are you kidding me? Keith, I'm up to here with life, and we stopped having kids years ago. We've moved on from that, and I keep hearing y'all asking and asking. But see, you know why we don't make ourselves available in that? Because those are transcendent things. They're outside of my imminent frame. And so they don't feel like a real need. This is what life feels like. I know you guys stand up and say this, but that's an announcement. You guys got needs, et cetera, et cetera. But the whole small group thing. Really, you want me to go spend a couple of hours in my precious week with people that aren't in my imminent frame? See, these are the deeper issues. The very concerning deeper issues. Because all across the church world, people who try to do small groups are having a hard time doing small groups. And all that I hear from most of them is that people are just too busy. That's partly true. But the other thing that has seeped in that none of us have noticed is this imminent frame dimension. You're just not in my circle. And so for me to go to a group where 75% of the people there aren't in my circle, why would I do that when I could go be with my peeps? Well, because the Bible calls us to live transcendently, not just imminently. There is an imminence in the Bible, but there's a transcendence to where that person in the back row over here that you've never spoken to, God has them in your world perhaps in a particular way, and they're outside of your imminent set of relationships. And are you open to that? And the body of Christ is becoming massively dysfunctional today because of this. Because quite honestly, what makes sense to us because we're enchanted is this. And so it doesn't even enter my mind to pursue that person that I don't know, because my imminent world is filled up with people. I don't know where I'd put anybody else anyway. But yet we're called as believers to live transcendent lives. Right, so let me just bore down in this for a second. In your outline there, I wrote this out. Kairos 2018, this land. It's a land that is enchanted by the imminent and disenchanted with the transcendent. We just don't have affection for. We're not motivated by. We're not eager for transcendent things. It's captivated by the here and the now. And it's uninterested and unmotivated by that which is beyond the here and the now. And just ponder the impact this is going to have on things that don't capture your interest. People who don't somehow touch upon your life in a way that awakens your motivation toward them. People that might be boring to you. People that might be older than you, younger than you, who live outside of your category for some way. They don't provide anything to motivate you to move toward them. Well, what are you going to do when your spouse starts feeling that way to you? I'll tell you what you're going to do. Because I see it, been seeing it for a few years. You're going to draw this strange conclusion that you married the wrong person. Oh, okay. What is it that makes them wrong? This is how you'll explain it. You're not going to explain it the way I'm explaining it. How you're going to explain it is, well, we were young, and we didn't know what we were doing. And heck, we only knew each other this long. And the next thing you know, we were married. All right. Shake hands with the rest of the people in the room with you. That's what most people's marriage story sounds like, right? I mean, Rufus and Fadge, they knew each other for a few weeks when he proposed, and they got married within like a month and a half or something, and then they were married for 65 years. Yeah. Here's the enchantment. Here's what you're not going to do. Hopefully this message will help you think differently, but here's what you're not going to do. You're not going to notice that you don't make my life feel the way I want it to. So therefore, you must not be right for me. I'm trying not to be really demoralizing and ugly in some of this. But this is the world you live in. That makes sense to the world you live in. It's enchanted. And so, if you don't make my life feel the way I long for it to feel, you must be wrong for me. How many of you know when Jesus showed up on planet Earth, the people around him didn't make him feel the way he wanted to feel? Do you have any idea of whether Jesus would have lived a different life if he was waiting for everybody to make him feel a certain way? And yet we're called to be conformed to the image of Christ. And so this enchantment in our world, it's not going to work. Defriending people because they just don't show up in your space the way you want them to. Changing jobs. Because, I don't know, it just doesn't make me feel the way I want it to. So everything becomes this. Everything is, if you show up in my little space right here, if you're right here for me the way I want you to be right here for me, then you're a good thing in my life. So this is why Christians are having such a choking problem with difficulty. If difficulty shows up in your space, you assume you're out of the will of God. Something is wrong. This relationship is wrong. I never should have done this, right? Because why? What are you thinking? If the world was going the way it's supposed to be going, according to the enchantments around me, everything in my space would be pleasurable and would reinforce me and would make me feel good. You may not be realizing how this is under your skin. I said it last week, but when you show up in the context of your life and you go get counseling, and the first thing that's got to be worked through is how PO'd you are at God. Well, where did you get the idea that there's something wrong going on in your life? Well, because the stuff that's invading my space is hard. And that's a problem. It's like I can start in Genesis and we can talk hard all the way through. But not the world I live in. It's supposed to be easy and reinforcing and pleasurable and enjoyable and one high after another, and just everything's going to be great. Do you understand why you go through Friends so quickly? Because none of this stuff can live up to these things that are in our lives. This is a natural-minded, in your outline there, temporal mindset that devotes attention, energy, and urgency only to that which is right here and right now. It is unmotivated by and uninfluenced by the unseen realities, by distant, non-personal activities, and by distant future time frames. We don't pay attention to it. We're not motivated by it. And we live in a world that has put on the throne of ultimate explanations for everything science and technology. Our culture looks to science to explain everything about why our world is the way that it is. And science can't seem to find devils in its test tubes. And so its only explanation is natural things, temporary things, material things, stuff going on inside your body, physical things. And that's the explanation here. Listen to this interesting thought. James Smith says, it is the emergence of the secular in this sense that makes possible the emergence of an exclusive humanism. Right? Doesn't need God, it's just humanity. A radically new option in the marketplace of beliefs. A vision of life in which anything beyond the imminent is eclipsed. For the first time in history, a purely self-sufficient humanism came to be a widely available option. I mean by this, a humanism accepting no final goals beyond human flourishing, nor any allegiance to anything else beyond this flourishing. If it doesn't offer me benefit and further my dreams and my desires, then I don't pay attention to it. That's the world of immanence. Greg Forrester says, central to Taylor's book is the concept of the immanent frame, a certain way of looking at the world of daily experience. It interprets all phenomena we encounter in the world as explainable by mechanistic natural causes. Today, everyone, the Christian, the Muslim, the Hindu, the atheist, and the wishy-washy spiritual but not religionist, sees the world through the immanent frame. Listen carefully, it drains the ordinary world of its deepest moral and spiritual significance, consigning not only atheists but also Christians and everyone else to struggle to find real meaning and purpose in their everyday lives. And worldliness becomes easier. Because let's face it, if there's nothing really outside of the here and the now, why do I decide to do life the way I decide to do it? Why would I install moral boundaries if there's nothing beyond the here and the now? The only ruling factor is, will it bring me pleasure? Because all I got is right here and right now. Now, I know every Christian says, well, I know that's not true. Yeah, well, we know it's not true. But in a land of enchantment, do we live like it's not true? Do I live transfixed by the transcendent, by the God who is outside of my immanent frame, by purposes that he has that are outside my immanence, by eternity and not just by today? In our world, that's just not happening, right? In your outline there, don't underestimate the power. What are y'all going to say after I said that? You're going to say the dark side, aren't you? No. Don't underestimate the power of the immanent frame. It is what's behind our lack of desperation for God and his intervention. Because we start believing that most of what's happening in our world is simply the result of natural forces and human will. And we lift up our eyes and we start living our life, and those are the things that we're trying to get in line. Natural forces and human will. Natural forces and human will. And we spend our time trying to influence those, manipulate those, control those, buy those, whatever we can do to influence those things, because that's what makes the world turn, doesn't it? That's what makes the events of your life become whatever they're going to be. For years, the church has been lamenting the death of the prayer meeting. Some of you guys who've been in church for a long time can remember there would be prayer meetings. You can tell stories about these prayer meetings. They were amazing and mysterious and wow, and people came together and pray. And all over now, anybody I read, it's a funeral service for the prayer meeting. Ain't nobody having prayer meetings. And those that are having prayer meetings, ain't nobody showing up for them. And if you ask the church and the average person, personally, how you doing in prayer? Everybody's got a lamentable, pathetic tale. Oh, I know I should. I've been meaning to. It's one of my resolutions. Oh. And year after year after year, personally, it never gains much real estate in our lives. And then the church gathers for prayer and people don't show up. Don't come. That's not. And you press, why? Well, I know I should. I'm just so busy. Just got so much going on. And that's probably true, but can I disturb you with a greater, deeper enchantment? The land that you live in has figured out how to look at life without transcendent things in it. So when it goes to fix life, it only needs to touch the imminent things. And that's the pattern of their life. And so in reality, the land you and I live in doesn't look to and doesn't need God. And that's a little bit more concerning for those of us who don't have a prayer life. Because the reason we don't have a prayer life isn't just an issue of time, it's an issue of, I don't really need him. I don't need to look outside of my resources, my influence, what I'm going to do next. I just need to work harder at work, study harder in school, have a better argument with that person. I need to move and shake the world. And so I'm going to spend my time learning how to do that and doing that. So pulling away from that to go get alone with God and have a conversation with him almost doesn't make any sense. Because I don't think there's really any power over here. The power is in what I do and who I can influence and how I can touch my world. That's where the power is. That's enchantment. We are enchanted. And so if we came in today and say, hey, I don't know if I'm enchanted or not. Well, if you lack a prayer life, you're enchanted. Because the prayer life is this simple formula. It's the creature recognizing his need for the creator. That's what prayer is. And when did it happen that we became convinced that we don't need him? That we're not desperate for him to be in our lives and to do things in our world? We got this. That's what the enchanted world has taught us. And we've got it. Charles Taylor says there's something very strong going on for this man-centeredness. He says anthropocentrism. A sense of invulnerability. Living in a disenchanted world, right, where there's nothing transcendent and spiritual, the buffered self is no longer open or vulnerable to a world of spirits and forces which cross the boundary of the mind. If in addition to disenchanting the world, we have also taken the man-centered turn and no longer even draw on the power of God. We don't need God to do what we do. Listen, it's not too long ago, and some of you guys will remember this, and you've got grandparents if you don't remember it, that everything was the devil. Everything was the devil. Got that devil of cigarettes, devil of alcohol, that devil of diabetes. The devil made me do it. One of you ladies steps out of bounds, you got the spirit of Jezebel. Right, you remember this stuff? You guys, how many of you guys remember this stuff? Yeah, right. The pendulum has swung, hasn't it? Such a different direction, such a different feel now. Now listen, I'm not saying all that stuff was accurate biblically, but what it had intact was the idea that there are spiritual forces behind natural forces. It got that right. Today, We don't even notice the spiritual forces. It's all about what's natural. Charles Taylor says, where earlier people spoke of possession by evil spirits, we think of mental illness. Again, the rich symbolism of the enchanted world is located by Freud in the depths of the psyche. And we all find this very natural and convincing. Like, why? Why do you do what you do? Well, psychology teaches. Well, it used to teach you do what you do because your parents potty trained you too early. And then they created an environment that was too, nurturing, or you weren't disciplined enough. And so you became what you became. And then psychology decided, no, that's not it. It's all in the gene pool. It's all in the biology. It's in what you inherited. But you were born that way. And so therefore, you do what you do because your genes have played themselves out, and that's right. Do you notice how natural the explanation is? Do you notice there's nothing spiritual in that explanation? It's got nothing to do with whether God's involved in your life. It's got nothing to do with whether there's repentance and cooperation and animation by the Spirit of God happening in our lives, right? There's no spiritual explanation for why you are the way you are in a world that's enchanted. And right now, all that matters is right now. Some of you guys, again, you've been in church long enough. Do you remember? There were a lot more songs years ago about heaven. We sang them at the men's gathering the other day. When we all get to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. I'll fly away. Oh, glory, I'll fly away in the sweet by and by. Right, do you know why those songs got created? Because right here and right now wasn't all that hot then. And they longed for something better. Today, it's pretty cool here. We like it here. It's a lot to enjoy, man. Got houses with stuff in them, cities we didn't build, indoor plumbing. There's a lot to enjoy. It's like, hey, I want to go to heaven one day, but I'm not real urgent about that. We don't sing for and long for the transcendent because we long for right here and right now. And that spell is upon our land, and it will seep into your bloodstream. And let me close with this disturbing thought. Eric, you can come back up. Last thing in your outline says, the unforeseen impact on how we feel about our lives because of this transcendent and imminent frame issue. When one loses the place of transcendent realities in life, all that's left is imminent things, the here and the now things. And when you set the weight of life on these things, it crushes them. It creates expectations for them that can never be met. And so you look in these categories that I've listed out there. There's trouble in these categories in our day. All kinds of trouble in these categories. Right? Relationships, friendships, marriages. People are falling out of love in marriages, getting divorced, and putting off marriage longer than they ever have. Because this institution, it can't live up to the expectations that we have for it. They're way too big. How'd they get so big? We stopped seeing transcendent things. We stopped looking for a world that brings reward through transcendency into our lives. And now we just stare at our spouse and we go, reward me. Stare at our children. Make me feel significant. Make me feel like my life matters. Make me feel important. Don't you embarrass me. Don't you make me feel like I wasted all these years investing in you. You go do something great that makes my name something great, will you? LeVar Ball. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to mention his name. Right? I mean, your life is supposed to, don't get weird here. Your life is supposed to have imminent things in it. It's supposed to. There's a dimension to the here and the now that you're supposed to live in. But you're supposed to have transcendent things in it as well. And so when you take the weight of life and you place it upon these things, Part of that weight goes on to imminent things, and part of that weight goes on to transcendent things. When the transcendent things become more and more distant and unmeaningful in our lives, all of the weight of your life begins to settle upon the imminent things of your life. And you will be grossly disappointed in them over and over and over and over again. By the way, some of you can set the clock running on how long it will be before you will leave this church because it's disappointing you. Church hopping has become an Olympic event in the Christian universe. All right, so we can address church hopping, but can you go with me here? The enchanting element is, why do we do that? Well, because we live in imminence. And we put so much weight on imminent things that everything's got to perform at an incredible level, or we want to move, we want to change jobs, we want to get rid of our spouse, we want to leave churches. Why are we doing all that? Because we're enchanted by something that has come into the reality of man's lives in the last 30, 40, 50 years that makes us only live for imminence with very little reality to transcendence. So what did I want to accomplish this morning? I just want to lift your eyes to notice this. Because quite honestly, I don't think the average Christian is seeing this. I think the average Christian is seeing the surface version of it. The average Christian can't figure out why their marriage isn't where it once was or where we'd like it to be, or why I'm just not real happy about this and that, or maybe anything right now. This is what's underneath that. The enchantment of our age has taught you to put so much weight on imminent things that it's crushing every gift God gives you in that category. It's crushing it. And you're doing nothing but complain and complain and complain without recognizing you're going to need a greater category of transcendent things in your life if you want to escape this enchanted world. Let's stand up together. Lord, it's very real and very likely that this morning, or maybe yesterday morning or last week, we were just doing life and we were just profoundly, uncomfortably aware that we're just not happy. And we can't figure out why. It's tempting to blame the features around us, the job, amount of money I'm making, my family, people near me, friends that I've disappointed, a marriage that doesn't feel the way it used to. Lord, what I pray this morning is you'd open our eyes to the spiritual realities of life. That we would not run down a road that only has imminent things in it. We would not diagnose our life only based on imminent things. For Lord, you were wise in warning your people. You can go into this land and it's got all kinds of good things in it. It's got careers in it. It's got home ownership in it. It's got spouses in it. It's got children in it. It's got hobbies in it. It's got good food in it. It's got all these things in it. But be careful that it doesn't enchant you and you forget me. Lord, some of us are here this morning and we're crushing everybody in our lives. because we've forgotten about you. You are so distant. We are so busy. Your presence doesn't show up. We still believe a lot about you. Lord, the reality of the goodness of who you are is so distant from us, and everything else feels so pressing, so demanding, and so real, and so hectic. Lord, I pray this morning you'd open our eyes by the Spirit that we might see enchantment. We might see how our land is under a spell, and perhaps we are under the spell as well. We haven't stopped to consider the things you longed for in the land were a fear of God and a love for God and a walking in His ways, that it may go well for us. Lord, at the beginning of 2018, we just want to be real. We want to be able to stand in this place and say, God, it's not going well for me right now. And Lord, can we hear your voice? Perhaps say something really uncomfortable but needed. Can you right now just speak to us if the right thing for us to hear is, it's not going well for you because you have forgotten me. Lord, I hate that. I hate that that could be true. I hate that I could live my life with so little preoccupation about you. Lord, I hate that. But you knew that could happen. You knew what was in me, and you knew what was in this land. You knew. So God, you have provided us insight. And Lord, I pray for that insight this morning. God, I pray for some that they would be delivered from this fault-finding, angry response to the people and the settings of their lives. Lord, they would this morning be convicted. They've been staring in the wrong place, trying to fix the wrong thing. And Lord, before they go quitting jobs and quitting marriages, well, they would draw near to you in such a way they begin to be aware of you again. They begin to sense your voice and hear you. Transcendent things begin to come to life. They begin to see the spiritual in the midst of the natural. They begin to see eternity beyond the temporary. God, if we don't see those things, we cannot do life. We cannot live in this land if we don't see those things. God, this morning, help us. Lord, you know as I've prayed about this, my fear and my unbelief is that we will not see and we'll just keep living enchanted lives that are blind to these realities. Lord, I hate it in my own soul. Lord, help us. Help us to escape this enchantment. Help us to live in a land where we are reminded of you, our fear of you, and our love for you, and our delight in all that you are about is enchanting to us. Lord, we pray this morning, we pray individually, but we pray together as a church. Lord, in a land of enchantment, would you make us to be a people enchanted with you? In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.